It was a bitter January afternoon when Margaret Holloway opened the door to her daughter's room. For the first time in nearly 5 months, the house in suburban Minnesota had remained eerily quiet since 17-year-old Hannah Holloway was found dead, a supposed accidental fall down the basement stairs. At least, that's what the police said. Margaret, however, never believed it. Not in her bones. Not in her dreams. Something about Hannah's death had felt orchestrated, too convenient, too silent, and too perfectly timed. The room was untouched, sealed by grief and denial. The sunlight pushed through the half-drawn curtains and touched her daughter's posters, bands, horses, that one movie with the astronaut she watched on repeat. Margaret stepped over laundry, a school backpack that hadn't moved since August, and the perfume still lingering faintly in the air. The room was still alive in some twisted echo. She came with a purpose, to finally sort, to finally say goodbye. But fate had other plans. While dusting the upper shelf behind Hannah's bookcase, Margaret's hand knocked loose a chunk of drywall. It didn't crumble. It popped off like a square tile, revealing a shallow square recess no bigger than a showbox. Inside was a small, black cube with a blinking red light, a hidden camera. Margaret froze. Her heart thudded so violently it blurred her vision. She pulled it out with trembling hands and turned it over. No brand. Just a tiny port for a microsed card. Panic gripped her. She called her brother, Daniel, a retired systems analyst. By nightfall, they had connected the camera to his laptop. What they found was not only horrifying, it changed everything. The videos were silent, grainy, low resolution, like from a surveillance system. They dated back nearly 11 months. The footage showed Hannah in her room, reading, dancing, laughing, crying, a normal teenage girl living her life. Then came a new pattern. At 2:13 a.m. every Tuesday, the camera clicked on automatically, and Hannah would rise from bed. Almost in a trance, she'd walk to her desk, open her journal, write something with eyes half shut, and then whisper toward the ceiling, as if talking to someone who wasn't there. Margaret covered her mouth, in shock. In the background, a shadow would sometimes move. Not hers, not Hannah's, something else. By week 4, Hannah had begun taping over the camera with a pink sticker. But the next week, it was gone, and the cycle repeated. In week 9's video, Hannah is visibly distressed. She's pacing, pressing her hands to her temples. Then, she screams something that the camera, though silent, clearly captures in her lips. "Stop watching me." She throws the camera to the ground. The footage goes sideways. The date, July 4th. She was found dead 3 days later. Margaret went to the police. They dismissed it. The camera could have been a prank. Teenagers filmed themselves all the time. Maybe it was her own. Margaret didn't buy it. Daniel analyzed the files deeper and discovered embedded timestamps that didn't match the creation time. The camera was being accessed remotely every Tuesday, likely through a local network. This wasn't a personal camera. It was planted. Margaret went to Hannah's school the next morning and met with the guidance counselor, Ms. Bernadine Clark. a kind but always distant woman who'd handled Hannah's counseling sessions. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Holloway, but Hannah never mentioned anything troubling, except for the hidden surveillance in her room." Ms. Clark's eyes twitched. "I think you should speak with the principal." But the principal had been on leave since August. His assistant said it was personal family matters. A man named Richard Bellamy, who'd worked at the school for over 20 years and oversaw the school's network infrastructure. The connection was forming. That night, Daniel tracked the camera's remote signal origin. It traced back to a private IP range, often used for home networks, with a router registered to an address barely a mile away. Margaret didn't sleep. At 6:13 a.m., she parked in front of a grey suburban house with a cracked white fence. Bellamy's house. She stared for hours. He never came out, but a figure did. A teenage girl, maybe 16, wearing the same school uniform Hannah used to wear. She looked pale, dead-eyed, like she hadn't slept in months. Margaret's fingers dug into the steering wheel. She returned the next day, and the next. On day 4, the girl left a package by the mailbox and ran back inside. Margaret approached. After she left, inside the mailbox was a USB drive wrapped in duct tape, labeled, "He's watching me too." The videos on the USB weren't of Hannah. They were of 6 other girls, all students. Same setup. Hidden camera angles. Similar times. Always at 2:13 a.m. Always some form of distress. And in 3 cases, the footage abruptly ended. No more files. Daniel ran background checks. 2 of those 3 had been listed as runaways in the last 2 years. One was found dead in a creek 5 towns over. None of it was in the news. Margaret went to the FBI. This time, they listened. Within 72 hours, agents raided Bellamy's home. Inside, they found 3 terabytes of footage, hard drives labeled with girls' names, and a custom server that remotely accessed school laptops, classroom security feeds, and unknown devices, many of which were hidden cameras planted in backpacks, walls, and yes, bedrooms. Bellamy was arrested, but he never made it to trial. The night before his court appearance, he was found dead. In his cell, a plastic bag tied tight over his head. Suicide, they said, but Daniel called it something else. Convenient. The town swept it under the rug. The school district cited failure of internal oversight. Teachers were transferred. Ms. Clark vanished without a trace. The other girls' families were given compensation money through anonymous funds. The local paper ran a 2-paragraph obituary. But Margaret didn't forget. She wrote every victim's name on Hannah's bedroom wall in black marker. She turned the room into a memorial, a war room, and she wrote a book. 2:13 a.m. became a bestseller. The book exposed not just Bellamy, but the systemic silence that protected men like him. It became a rallying cry for parents. Laws were passed, tech reforms initiated. Hidden surveillance bans in minors' homes were enforced under new legislation, known as the Holloway Act. But the story didn't end there. One night, almost a year after the trial, Margaret got a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have looked behind the wall. File attached. It was a photo of her own living room, taken at 2:13 a.m. Margaret called Daniel in a panic. They tore apart the entire house, wall by wall. Hidden inside the basement vent was another black cube, identical to the one in Hannah's room. Another camera, but this time they kept it running. They rigged a signal trap, and at exactly 2:13 a.m. that Tuesday, it transmitted not to a domestic IP, to an offshore address in Bangkok. They had only found the tip of the iceberg. Hannah was the first to be heard, but she wouldn't be the last. And from the other side of silence, her voice now screamed loud enough to shatter walls.